At 56 years old, Phil Mickelson has already won almost everything golf can give a player. 6 major championships, a Hall of Fame career, more than $1 billion in career earnings. But right now, none of that is the story, because 2 businesses, tied directly to Phil and his family, are being forced into total liquidation. The man who spent decades building an empire on the golf course is now watching parts of that empire disappear, and the obvious question is simple. How does this happen to someone with his money, his reputation, his success? What exactly went wrong? Badly enough that liquidation became the only option? Because this is not just a story about 2 failing businesses. It is about a chain of decisions stretching back years, hundreds of millions of dollars. A golf league fighting for survival, gambling losses that would destroy almost anyone else, a damaged reputation, and a private family health crisis that has kept Phil away from golf for most of 2026. Every piece connects, and once you see the entire picture, the collapse starts making a lot more sense. In my view, this is what happens when a career built around risk finally reaches the point where the luck stops. Do you think Phil brought this on himself, or did circumstances finally overwhelm him? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe, because this story is still developing. To understand why liquidation happened, you first need to understand what was actually being liquidated. These were not random investments Phil forgot about. They were businesses connected to his name, his family, and his future away from professional golf. The first was Five Guys. Phil Mickelson was part of an ownership group that acquired rights to multiple Five Guys franchise locations in Orange County, California. Not one restaurant, several full-scale operations, employees, commercial leases, managers. Food costs, payroll, franchise fees, everything that comes with running a restaurant business in one of the most expensive parts of the country, and in 2026 that math became brutal. Rent went up, labor became more expensive, beef prices increased, operating costs climbed across the board. One location can absorb problems for a while, several locations multiply them. A single restaurant might carry tens of thousands of dollars in payroll every month before the first burger is sold. Now multiply that across multiple stores, then add utilities, food, insurance, lease payments, franchise fees, and suddenly a small drop in sales becomes a serious problem. When revenue falls but fixed costs keep moving in the opposite direction, eventually the numbers stop working. And when the numbers stop working, creditors start paying attention. The second business was smaller, but much more personal. In 2020, Phil co-founded For Wellness with business partner Dave Phillips. Its flagship product was called The Good Stuff, a coffee-based nutritional supplement designed around energy and focus. It made sense on paper. Phil loved coffee. He was one of the most recognizable golfers in the world. Combine his name with a performance product and build a wellness brand around it. But the supplement industry is vicious. Companies spend millions fighting for attention. Golf fame helps. It does not guarantee that someone shopping for nutritional supplements will choose your product. For Wellness was based in Scottsdale and employed only a handful of people. That sounds small, until the money stops coming in. 5 employees still have salaries, families, mortgages, operating expenses, and once marketing dries up, sales can disappear with it. Neither business was necessarily built around a ridiculous idea. Five Guys remained a major restaurant brand. Performance supplements remained a huge market. So why did both operations end up in trouble? Because they were hit by something much larger. And this is where Phil's golf career enters the story. In 2022, Mickelson made the decision that changed almost everything. He joined LIV Golf. The reported contract was approximately $200 million. At the time, the logic looked obvious. Phil was already in his 50s. His best competitive years were behind him, and LIV was offering life-changing money for a limited schedule. 14 events, no cuts, massive checks, financial security. But the deal had another price. His relationship with the PGA Tour was effectively destroyed. Phil walked away from the system where he had built his career. Then came 2026. According to the situation described here, the Saudi Public Investment Fund, after pouring billions into LIV Golf, withdrew its support. Suddenly, the league had a cash problem, a very big one. LIV was now trying to raise approximately $300 million in fresh capital by September 1, 2026. If that money did not arrive, the future of the league itself was in question, and Phil was not the only player exposed. Every golfer who had left the PGA Tour for LIV had made some version of the same calculation. Walk away from FedEx Cup points, walk away from established tour status, walk away from the old system, take the money. The problem is that the money looked permanent, until it did not. Players thought they were trading uncertainty for guaranteed income. But if the league fails, the guarantee only matters as much as the organization behind it. The PGA Tour, meanwhile, did not stand still. It changed. The schedule evolved. Signature events grew, purses increased, broadcast agreements strengthened, fields became more structured. The tour Phil walked away from in 2022 was no longer exactly the same tour sitting there in 2026. And the hardest part? It did not need to beg him to come back. That is where this becomes personal. According to the transcript, the remaining years of Phil's LIV contract were not necessarily guaranteed if the league itself failed. That meant a man who had built his future around a reported $200 million agreement could suddenly lose his most reliable golf-related income stream. And returning to the PGA Tour would not be simple. That relationship had already been badly damaged. Suspensions, possible fines, lost status. A completely different competitive structure. Phil had bet on one system. Now that system was unstable, and the businesses outside golf still needed cash. The Five Guys locations still had rent. For wellness, still had expenses. Employees still needed to be paid. The lights did not care whether LIV Golf survived, but the LIV situation was only one half of the financial story. The other half had been following Phil for decades. Phil Mickelson's gambling history has been discussed publicly for years, and the numbers described in the transcript are staggering. Losses approaching $100 million over roughly 3 decades. More than $40 million lost between 2010 and 2014 alone. More than $1 billion reportedly wagered over his lifetime. Think about that number. $1 billion in bets. At one point, the transcript describes Phil losing $143,000 on baseball bets in a single day. For most people, that amount changes a life. For Phil, it was one day of gambling, and maybe that tells you something about the mindset. Golf teaches confidence. You stand alone over the shot. There is no teammate taking responsibility, no coach calling the play. You read the lie. Judge the risk, trust your instincts, and live with the result. Phil built an entire golfing identity around taking shots other players would not take, but gambling does not care how creative you are. It does not care how many majors you won. The numbers eventually win. Over time, losses at that scale do more than hurt a bank account. They affect choices. Liquidity.risk. Tolerance.businesses. Relationships. Everything. Then there was the 2016 insider trading case. Phil was required to repay approximately $1 million in profits connected to stock trades, based on confidential information. He was not criminally charged, according to the transcript, but the reputational damage remained. Now combine the pieces. Years of enormous gambling losses, a massive LIV contract, suddenly under threat businesses, requiring continuous cash and a reputation already absorbing damage. That alone would be enough to create a serious financial squeeze, but the story became even more personal. Phil also lost his place at one of the most exclusive private golf clubs in California, the Farms Golf Club in Rancho Santa Fe. For Phil, this was not just another place to play golf. Private. Clubs like that are communities. Your locker is there, your friends are there, your family knows the place. Business relationships form there. The staff knows you, the caddies know your game. You become part of the institution. And then Phil was removed, according to the transcript. The club took what it described as decisive action following allegations involving inappropriate contact with a female employee. His membership was revoked. He was told he could not return. Think about how far that fall. Phil's 6 major championships, one of the most famous golfers alive, and now not welcome at a club where he had spent years. That is bigger than embarrassment. It tells you how much his standing inside the golf world had changed. Then came another. Property, the Madison Club in La Quinta, California. Phil owned a condo there, and according to the story, Amy Mickelson's wealth management advisors pushed for the property to be sold immediately, not someday, not when the market improved. Sold. When financial advisors begin recommending fast asset sales, the message is usually obvious: liquidity matters, cash flow matters, and something is under pressure. But even that was not the final piece, because in 2026, Phil Mickelson has played almost no competitive golf, just one event. According to the transcript, he missed the Masters. He missed the PGA Championship. He was absent from LIV events. And this time, the reason was not money, it was family. Phil said he was stepping away because of a private family health matter. The transcript says the situation involved one of his children and required his full attention. Amy Mickelson. herself a breast cancer survivor, was dealing with the situation as well. And whatever people think about Phil's decisions, this part matters. He stepped away. He put his family first. But financially, stepping away creates another problem. When you do not play, you do not earn tournament money. When sponsorships disappear, another income stream disappears. When LIV money becomes uncertain, another one disappears, but the businesses keep operating. Rent still arrives, payroll still arrives. Suppliers still want payment, and eventually, something has to give. That is where liquidation enters the picture. The word sounds technical, it is not. Liquidation means the business ends. Assets are. Sold equipment is sold. Inventory is sold. Employees lose their jobs, locations close. The operation disappears. For restaurant franchises, that can mean grills, fryers, coolers, registers, signs, furniture, everything being cataloged and sold. The lease goes back. The doors close. For wellness, inventory gets cleared. The office empties. Employees leave. A brand Phil helped build stops being an operating business. That is what makes this different from losing money on a stock. These businesses carried his name, his family's involvement, his identity outside golf, and now they are being dismantled. So how does a man still reportedly worth hundreds of millions lose businesses? Because net worth and cash flow are not the same thing. A person can own valuable assets and still have companies that cannot meet their obligations. The transcript describes creditor-driven liquidation. Debts could not be paid, assets had to be sold, and once that process starts, sentiment does not matter. The business is finished. Which leaves one final question. What happens to Phil Mickelson now? LIV Golf's future is uncertain. His PGA Tour relationship is broken. His businesses are disappearing. His reputation has taken enormous damage. And at 56 years old, his competitive options are narrowing. He still has money, reports cited in the transcript. Places net worth somewhere between roughly 300 million and 383 million. He is not broke, but that is not really the point. The question is, identity. Where does he belong now? There is one possible path. The Champions Tour. Phil is old enough. He could play senior. Events, smaller purses, smaller crowds. A quieter version of professional golf. Golf has forgiven players before. Time changes reputations. Fans move on. But that path would require Phil to accept something he has spent most of his career resisting, a smaller stage. For a man who spent decades being one of golf's biggest attractions, that may be harder than any financial loss. The institutions are not rushing to rescue him. The USGA has not stepped in. The R&A has not stepped in. Major championships are not building their future around him. They are not necessarily banning him. They simply are not calling, and sometimes silence says more than punishment. Phil himself has said that his priority is becoming the husband, father, and man his family deserves. Maybe that is the most important statement in this entire story, because Phil Mickelson was once one of the most marketable athletes in golf. Only Tiger Woods stood above him. Rolex, Callaway, KPMG Major. Sponsors wanted him. Fans loved the risk, the smile, the impossible shots. He became the people's champion. Now, the story looks very different. Gambling.live. Golf, the lost relationships damaged. Reputation, businesses being liquidated. A career built on risk finally reaching the point where another gamble may not fix the last one. So now you know what the business is. You know why they came under pressure. You know how the LIV situation connects. You know where the gambling fits, and you know why. 2026 became the year everything started colliding at once. Only one question remains. What is left for Phil Mickelson? He built an empire on the golf course. Then he tried to build another one away from it. But empires do not last forever. At 56, with two businesses being liquidated, a $200 million contract under threat, and no obvious competitive home waiting for him, golf's greatest gambler may finally have reached the moment when the next bet cannot erase the last one. The question is no longer whether Phil Mickelson can come back. The question is much darker. What exactly is left to come back to?